I thought maybe we could sit down and start to unpack what happened in Kerr County and Kerrville over the July 4th weekend. So guys, as I said, very bittersweet, but thank you all for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for being on. We're pretty passionate about what just happened. I want to get the information out.
So could we start off by talking about your professional background so the audience is understand the perspective you had from this disaster?
Sure. So I'm an emergency manager from North Carolina and spent many years there dealing with refugees, active shooters, and terrorist threats and all sorts of things. Ended up working for a company that took me into the countries, different states, different municipalities, all kinds of different disasters, all the way down to the Caribbean. And started our own company in 2017 where we'll likely offer services, operations, planning, research, all kinds of things related to security and disaster.
Thanks for having us, Tom. This is Bridget. My background is 30 plus years as a CPA in North Carolina. My role is basically supporting the administrative and the financial side of it. So we've been very fortunate to have met some wonderful folks that have deep experience in emergency management, and we're here to share the expertise that we've acquired with, hopefully, the Kerrville community.
So as you know, my audience is primarily a corporate audience, and corporate compliance officers, general counsels, CEOs, etc. And we talk a lot about risk. You guys are playing, I would say, more in the public sector, where risk can involve loss of life, and that's, of course, the tragedy that we are facing now. But I wanted to maybe start with how to even think about risk. And so in the corporate world, the formula I use is something along the lines of the following. You identify the risk, you assess that risk for your organization, you put together a risk management strategy, you train on that strategy, you implement the strategy, you monitor the results of that strategy, then you improve as needed. Does that general framework work for the type of risks that you guys and Salas deals with, or because of the potential of loss of life, you have to look at it in a different way?
No, actually, the tenets are pretty much the same. We refer to it as preparedness, protection, response, mitigation, and recovery. And we work within those five different areas. And it's pretty much the same. We work with organizations, private, public, you name it, governmental organizations to basically accomplish the same thing that you guys do in the legal world, the compliance world. However, ours might be a little bit broader from like a legal or financial risk. We do deal with that, but we also then look at the security in logistics, supply chain, things like that.
One of the biggest differences in the corporate world, and most CEOs will tell you that they may answer to shareholders, but they may feel like they don't. And they are at the top of the organizations, and when they want something accomplished, they can get something accomplished. My sense is the world you guys work in, there are multiple stakeholders, and they may have different agendas. There may be multiple government agencies involved, obviously overlapping or adjacent fields that they're working in. And I guess I wanted to maybe start with helping the audience understand. We had a weather disaster or a weather event which led to a natural disaster. How do you help one geographic area that may have multiple governmental agencies involved think through something like that?
No, that's very perceptive of you. That's the big challenge, is getting everybody on the same page. In emergency management, they often don't have any authorities unless they've been a declaration. Then they have authority to take action, usually just in a response. But emergency management, they refer to as coordinators. They coordinate ideals, they coordinate expectations, goals, budgets, funding, efforts, training, and all of that. But it's always, as you said, across all the different functional areas. It could be integrating public and private organizations. It could be dealing with the politicians and legislature. It's pretty broad. It feels like you're pushing a giant rock up Pike's Peak every day, and it's really difficult. Pretty difficult.
And for our audiences, yes, we just got a flash flood alert. So here we are and still in the middle of it. So let's go to tell our listeners where we are. We're in Kerr County, which is about an hour west of San Antonio off of I-10. There, we obviously have a county government. We have some cities, small cities. The biggest city is the county seat of Kerrville with 23,000, and numerous smaller communities who were devastated by this event. How would you help those different governmental entities think through a coordinated strategy, or is that really the responsibility of the county?
Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the county. Just like the private organization, they had a duty of care. And you can't shirk that or run away from it. The problem is getting everybody really to understand the implications of planning, lack of funding, lack of funding, training, lack of training. Awareness and education now is probably the greatest tool. So as emergency managers and county officials, the more education you can be, the better of yourself and constituency. When you have an event like this, unfortunately, that's when everybody gets educated or finally understands what's being told to them or what information is available. But those who hadn't been through the event haven't had the benefit of that hyper-focus into the problems and the solutions. So you kind of don't know what you don't know until after something tragic happens. In emergency management, we always say, ask the old timers, and they'll tell you, because they've been around enough to see it.
So you guys said you came from North Carolina. I'm an avid hurricane follower, having grown up on the Texas Gulf Coast, and I know lots of hurricanes have hit the Capes in North Carolina, and they'll take a big hook into North Carolina. So my sense is you have seen that type of disaster in addition to numerous others.
Oh, yeah, we've seen a lot. In fact, our company was deployed in 2017 down to the Caribbean. And that was, if there was such thing as a Category 6, it probably was that or more. And we were there right through the middle of that. We saw the absolute devastation, not only in the Caribbean, but also in North Carolina. Extreme flooding, widespread flooding. Not to diminish what's occurred here in Kerrville, but it's kind of localized along the river banks. That's a blessing in many respects, but it is a curse this particular day, July 4th, on a Friday, on a long weekend. And couldn't let us for the worst time for it to occur. But yeah, we've seen a lot. We've seen the big money come in from FEMA and federal government pour into training and local efforts for mitigation. It's very instrumental in public awareness to things, and not only at police and fire level, but also right down into the neighborhoods, the community centers. And that public awareness and education is probably the greatest thing that I would recommend at this point as chairperson.
Is education training, or is that something different?
Something different.
Could you explain the differences?
Awareness versus training. Training comes off of awareness, but let's start with training. Training is what to do, how to do it, to look for the signs, the steps, the trigger points, and what resources you have available. In training, you learn what the gaps are, and you identify those gaps, and then you go fill those gaps with more training, more resources. Whereas awareness is more or less having you folks understand the importance of IPAW's alert notification and the role that National Weather Service plays in events. Understanding that Facebook and social media are marginal, they can be effective when localized, but they're marginal tools, not necessarily to utilize them 100%. You learn that mitigation of your own property is important. Fire is a big concern here. So with awareness, you know that I need to cut all the juniper or cedar trees 20 feet from the house. That's the awareness round. I would say probably the best way to summarize awareness is to know what you don't know and know who to ask, as opposed to training.
Okay, so it sounds in the framework I laid out of a risk mitigation strategy, there's actually another component to the corporate world, and that's this education/awareness before we get to training. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely. It's part of the gap analysis that we conduct in our business. We roll in, we interview, we look at documentation, we look at all the programs that are available, subject matter experts do, and then we basically establish the starting point really for the awareness campaign, and then the training to follow on.
And then if we've kind of followed that risk management strategy, when you get the awareness and you have put the strategy in place, let's talk a little bit about the training. You mentioned training for individuals, but how would you help a county or a city do actual training? Is it just simply a tabletop exercise? Is it getting everybody comfortable with their roles? Is it having a binder on a bookshelf where at least one person knows where it is?
That's a really good question. There's a stair-step model that you follow. The FEMA's done a really good job of laying out what the steps are. So it begins with awareness. It begins with, usually it's triggered by an event like this, but it begins with awareness, and then everybody gets on board and realizes that, hey, we don't know if we don't know, maybe we need to go do something about it. And then you have conversations, just discussion-based leadership planning. It forks into review of plans, identify the gaps in plans, and then you tabletop those plans, and then it sets up to a tabletop exercise, and then those who take the lessons learned and build it in. And so it's iteration of evolution. You probably about halfway through paper and talking before you actually start moving, putting boots on the ground and testing equipment and deployment of assets. Well, once that happens, though, that's one of the expenses. Then we involve people to get hurt during that. So want to do as much as you possibly can before people actually jump in trucks and start moving.
How often would you advocate that a company, a county, or other municipal government jurisdiction take their plan down and actually run tabletop exercises or review it? Annually, 6 months, 2 years?
Yeah, you touched on a really sensitive issue. Time. You probably saw that one coming too. There's an adage that plans sit on the shelf and collect dust. And I've been at this a long time, and you've seen that happen many times over. You have to review and involve your plan, your capabilities all the time. You can never train or plan enough. Period. Well, it's depending on what it's for. Some of the lovelier counties or jurisdictions that have a ULASI language instead of advanced in VHS, they have a training cycle or a planning cycle that's implemented every quarter. They do review your emergency management. From the security coordinators and local review plans, usually about every quarter. To answer your question, it can't be trained enough. And I would say is a town like Kerrville, I'm currently just stepping out here, but if I was the emergency management coordinator for Kerrville, I would like to see everybody engaged in something that believes in something.
Before we get to the maybe differences between Kerrville and Kerr County, and the reason I ask you about your experience in North Carolina, we've heard the phrase bandied around, the 100-year rain or the 100-year flood. I lived through 2 500-year floods and one 1,000-year flood in 18 months in Houston, and that just seems to me to be a big rain. And you can get big rains, and even if they're theoretically going to hit every 100 years, how do you really get people to understand the concept? That doesn't mean it's going to happen in 100 years. It's just a statistical probability.
I would stop using the closing numbers in those scales. If you're not a scientist, a lot of people are putting the time to learn it and understand it. But you're probably not, or you're going to misuse it or misunderstand it. I would stop using those scales altogether. Think categories of anything, really, because it can jump up to bite you.
So I think it would be fair to say that we can all say something bad is going to happen weather-related. Now the question is, how big is that risk and how do we prepare for it? If we've prepared for it, what are some of the steps you would suggest that a city or county put in place to prepare for such a weather-related event?
That reveals itself in training. EXL Solutions pioneered a communication training program. And Communication is sharing of information. It's not always sharing information with the public, which everybody just kind of understands and stops there, but sharing information with interlocutors across departments, police, fire, as well as, which is voluntary organizations that could do disaster, the state, the federal government. Information is the key, and it gets lost. Really, that's where it needs to start. And we, the people are communicating well, and frequently, that's when you need gaps in training, gaps in resources change. And, or input, I should say, for me to go out and fill those gaps. Does that answer your question?
It does. How important is there for one person to be in charge? Or is that you can be in charge by committee?
That's a loaded question. I've seen the good and the bad of that many times. And certain situations, it has to be the right person. The right person in charge is really better. For a very specific type of situation, if it's really fast moving, and you don't have time to talk or discuss or gain consensus of opinion. Sometimes you just have to react like active shooter type of situation. Really fast moving. We work with Fort Lauderdale for the active shooter incident. We're working Los Angeles, LAX, many other airports and cities around the country for active shooter or terrorist type threats. And we train before or we train after. And through written reviews after afterwards. In many of those cases where it's fast moving, the person is the best person and truly skilled will jump in, and that's the right decision. However, if you have time to gain consensus, like a hurricane or a flood or a tornado, then we have what we call a unified command system, where it's the best person or the best expert at that type of skills being utilized is in control or in command. So you'll have a roundtable of folks who are constantly assessing the situation. You have what we call like a battle rhythm or an operational day every 2 hours, every 4 hours, every 6 hours. And that's the evolution of that. So if in a situation like a flood here in Kerrville, I guarantee you they've got an incident now, and we've got the guys responsible, the gals responsible for debris cleanup now. You have operations, police and fire doing search and rescue. You have utilities, and you have financial. So that everybody kind of has their own expertise that they're looking out for that respect.
So let's move to after the disaster happens, which is what the situation we're in now, or at least part of that. What's the role of, how do you, if I can use the word triage, how do you triage the actions to take immediately? Is it immediate safety of the public? Is it moving to a rescue as soon as possible? How do you think through those issues?
We have a kind of a mindset that we call the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And that's our guiding ethos. DNA response, again, is greatest good for the greatest number of people. Some folks you can't help if you can't get to them. And it's a really decision to make. And with that same mindset goes to his government and gets the power off for the greatest number of animals first, or the hospital first, or HEB first. You get all those utilities that need, those people who need to respond, get them cared for first. Then they can go out and respond and get the rest of the community back. So that's a big decision that has to be made with a lot of information on the event and what's happening, what's coming up. Like at the moment, we still have more rains coming. It'll change what they may decide to work on or not work on.
And then who should, or how do you think through the coordination of all of the services that are necessary? You name some of those: utilities, hospitals, food delivery. I'm going to say room and board. I'm going to say community volunteers. The Cajun Navy is in Kerrville. Every volunteer group that steps forward in these times of emergency and tragedy. How do you coordinate that? Is that a county, city function? Is some sort of governmental function?
All that happens through the Emergency Operations Center, and then there's different layers So the case may be made a report to your fire department, or may report to the police department, or may report to utilities, or one of the other VROADs, as I mentioned, voluntary organizations. It depends on the jurisdiction and what's happening at that time. But that coordination process is part of that EOC command and EOC management. That's the hub for all major decisions. The more direct response type decisions occur at a command post, say in Kerrville along the river. They probably set up a tent, have a van down there where they're making immediate decisions based on a kind of a tactical operation. But the bigger picture, that's all referring to how to use gun.
And would that include things like Coast Guard helicopters or other really high-value rescue operations?
Yes. Sometimes that'll be partitioned off to just operations. Coast Guard, for example, if air operations is a bunch of maybe emergency operations center. But generally speaking, all that feeds through.
Let me change the focus just a little bit to talk about the individuals involved in the rescue effort. Is it all hands on deck every minute until it's finished? Do you have the opportunity, or should you rotate men or women in and out? How do you keep their mental health so that they can continue to do their job as well as their physical health? Because these are harsh conditions and a lot of heat and a lot of humidity. Everybody's in a lot of plastic, and it's got to be absolutely miserable.
That's a really good question. The last thing you want is for somebody else to get hurt, and your responders can get hurt very easily, fighting in the fingers through heart attacks and so forth, because and all that gear. Or if you're tired, you start making bad decisions. You don't want that to be lives matter, lives are at stake. The first responder, a lot of people just think of the first responders as extinguish the fire and public utilities. So there's a lot of other people behind the scenes, probably 5 times more fates behind the scenes, pushing baby and making decisions, doing this I actually work for these been down, finding resources, coordinating resources, and those people burn out. But if you I run an operation, I'm fittings for walking around with Nova bars and bottles of water. And I learned that you can't get people to take a break, it's just part of their mindset. They glummed it up at the table. Although they need it, you just see them start to make bad decisions, or just stare off into space at times. So you actually push enough water to them, it makes you look at the bathroom thing, and just to get them out, you have to pride them. And that's a really deceptive question. It's a challenge. I'm myself guilty of that. Yeah, my work. And many of these events, 22 hours a day for 6 or 7 days on end.
What about the role of private nonprofit organizations such as the Salvation Army or the American Red Cross? Do they typically have a point person or liaison already in place, and how do they work to supplement what the government officials might need?
They do. They do have people in place. They're coordinators as well. We have a saying in Homeland Security that the last place you want to meet somebody for the first time is on a pile of rubble at a disaster. So that's part of that training and evolution that we talk about, and an awareness evolution. You invite your partners in, you get them engaged as frequently as possible so that they can meet you and know you and develop that trust and understanding what your capabilities are, both asset-wise, resource-wise, but also mentally and thinking-wise. Those coordinators or those leaders of those ROADs, like the Red Cross or the Baptist disaster relief organizations, those interfaith, which is a multi-denomination organization. There's a lot of them. Those coordinators are excellent, and give them a task, keep it focused, and they can get it done. But you have to be clear, understanding what their needs are, and give them very clear and specific tasks. It's very skill. Yeah. If you just say, hey, they're clean with this neighborhood, it's a lot of information as to what they need in that. Some of them because some of them you have been trained working and coordinating. You won't need anything because they already know they're what they need out of it.
So at this point, as I said, we're 2+ days in. We are still finding survivors of the tragedy. At some point, this may move to a different type of recovery. And how does that decision get made, and what are the implications of that?
Yeah, that's really a good question. It's not a switch that you turn it off. Say, okay, turn the switch, we're done. An event like this doesn't happen that way. Once we found that ends one phase of it. But there's other phases that are going on. Life safety phases are still there. You have to watch out roads, to dangerous bridges, or sinkholes may suddenly appear, power lines that are unstable, or poles that are unstable, drinking water, snakes, feeding folks. You can have contaminated water, you can have contaminated food, refrigeration units at kitchens, and that put restaurant type or school type kitchens. I can't remember the recognized time. All I'm saying, if the refrigeration is down for 12 hours, though, they can't throw anything away. And they don't always do that because they're used to treat food like they do at home, but it's very different. So now you have food illnesses to deal with, medicines that have to be trucked in, medicines that have to be kept cold. People on dialysis machines, respirators, oxygen. It just goes on and on. So even though the initial threat seemed like it might be over, there's still tertiary or secondary threats that just continue to evolve. And you could go, like in a large, widespread hurricane type event, it could go on for 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks easily.
Mark, I think we're probably going to end this podcast at this point. Before we leave, I wanted to ask if our listeners wanted any more information on your company or find out more about your services, what might be the best place for them to go?
Well, it's www.salus.solutions, SALUS.solutions.
I think I can safely say we're going to continue this conversation.
I hope we do. There's a lot to accomplish.